Hello and welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast. I'm your host, Nate Goss. Today we bring you another edition of The Past is Present, where local history librarian Jenny Barry visits the podcast to talk about Libertyville history topics. For this episode, we're taking a cue from retired late-night host Jay Leno and doing our own version of headlines. Only this time we are looking at headlines from the past. Jenny spends a lot of time digging through Libertyville news archives, and over the years, she's uncovered some rather unusual pieces of journalism. And now she is ready to share a few of the best with you, our listener. So, Jenny, let's just dig right in. What do you have for us today?
Sure. Hi, Nate. So, I go through the newspapers all the time, and not usually looking for these headlines, but they always pop up. So sometimes they just grab my attention and you want to know more about it, or there's a word that's used in the headline that you haven't heard before, or maybe it's used in a way that's different than today. So I've pulled a couple of articles. Some of them are local in nature, and some of them may not have a local news, but they were in the local paper, so they may have been a wire feed from somewhere.
Generally speaking, what are the main newspapers you're kind of looking at, and also like time periods we're looking at?
So most of the articles that I have today are from about the first or second decade of the 1900s.
Okay.
They are all from our local paper, which at the time was called the Libertyville Independent. If it changed, some of these might be from the Lake County Independent, which is a precursor to the Libertyville Independent. It changed names a couple of times, but they're all forerunners to what some of our listeners may remember as the Independent Register.
Sure, okay. So what do we got?
Here's our first one. This is from the Libertyville Independent, October 7th, 1920, page 9. The headline is, "Garbage Can Will Run Your Flivver." So what is a flivver?
Lots to unpack there.
Exactly. So let me read it's a real brief article. Natalite, I believe that's how it's pronounced, made from decayed vegetables, spoiled grain, and other refuse, is to be the motive power for automobiles in the future, according to A. Burlington Green, who has arrived from South American ports on the Pacific steamer Orita. Captain Green, a director in the Natalite Company, said Natalite is a compound of vegetable alcohol, ether, and arsenic, which was served as fuel during the war. Its cost to the manufacturer is 18 cents a gallon. Okay, so
this sounds almost like a precursor itself to like ethanol.
It is.
Okay.
So there's two things to this article that caught my attention. The first was the headline, because I don't know what a flivver is, and the article itself doesn't say what it is. So let me tell you what a flivver is.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So a flivver is a word that came about in about 1910, and it usually refers to a small, cheap, usually old automobile.
All right.
It may more specifically refer to a Model T, but it doesn't have to refer to a specific type of car.
So this isn't a model called the flivver.
Right.
This is just like sort of how we would talk about a sedan or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we say car, we say, automobile. It's just another word for that. I almost said jalopy, but I'm not sure if jalopy is a good word for that.
I'm thinking this podcast is going to bring the word back.
It is. We're going to start it today. It's interesting because the word flivver actually started out as a slang verb meaning to fail. So the example in the Merriam-Webster dictionary says, "If this film flivvers, I'll be in trouble." So somehow that word to fail, the slang word to fail, got applied then to sort of a junk car.
So it's sort of like how we would call a junker.
Yes, exactly. So then, I saw this Natalite, and you think, this is 1920, and they're having alternative fuels, which is sort of interesting. I think the other thing that I come across are things that we think are rather new and inventive have actually been around for a long time. Maybe they just weren't able to be widely manufactured or distributed, but the idea's been around for a long time.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah. So I found an article in a magazine called The Automobile from June 17th, 1915, that says, Natalite, a gasoline substitute. So the Royal Automobile Club in England had been conducting tests with this particular fuel. The name actually comes from Natal, I believe is pronounced, Natal, the country of its origin, which is a province in South Africa. And at that point it said it is a mixture, the principal ingredient, alcohol, being obtained from the waste products of sugar refining factories. And one of the advantages of it is that safety against fire. It is claimed that water will readily extinguish the flames.
Kind of makes you wonder why it never took off.
Exactly. I don't know why, but obviously we're not using it today.
That's true. Very, very true.
All right. I got another one for you. This is the Libertyville Independent, September 28th, 1916. Hunting season opens October 1st. Nimrod's waiting. All right, so what do you know the word Nimrod to mean?
My generation, it's like the name of a Green Day album. And,
I hadn't even gone there, yeah.
And Nimrod being like, sort of like the way you'd use the word doofus, or like someone who,
idiot.
Idiot,
kind
of that
stupid
sort of word.
Kind of thing. Yeah. So that's why I thought, are these
are they
idiots
hunting?
waiting or to hunt? What is this? Is this a good thing? So I'll just read a little bit from the article, and then I'll explain a little bit more. This is from Springfield, Illinois. Hunters all over the state are polishing up the cannons, end quote, and preparing for what promises to be one of the best fall seasons in the history of the sport. Prairie chicken and cock pheasants are in season, commencing October 1st, and sportsmen are also expecting some good duck shooting this coming month. So I don't know if you can hunt prairie chickens anymore. I didn't look that up. There may not be any yet.
I'm not as much of a hunter as maybe some of our listeners are. They can message us and chime in on
exactly.
that.
So it tells you kind of what was around at that point. The other little thing I liked from this article was about rabbits. Rabbits came in September 1st. Many are finding the younger ones decidedly tasteful at the present time. But in the minds of many experts, a frost is needed before they are really good.
So they think you need a good frost on the ground to get a tastier rabbit?
I guess so.
Who knew?
I know. We'll have to see if any of our chefs know anything about that.
So that still doesn't quite answer the Nimrod question.
It does not. So I went and looked up what Nimrod was. So Nimrod traditionally was meant to refer to a hunter. I don't know if we have a slang word for hunters today. But
not that I can think of.
Hunters were called Nimrods. And that goes back to actually a name in Genesis. Nimrod, a descendant of Ham, was a mighty huntsman. However, it has obviously changed in its meaning, popular meaning. And apparently, according to Garner's modern American usage, that can be tied back to Bugs Bunny.
I kind of remember this, actually.
So we all know him for "What's up, Doc?"
Yeah.
Right? That's his famous phrase. But he would often say to Elmer Fudd, who was a hunter, he would say, "What a moron! What a Nimrod!"
Wow, I remember this actually now.
From reruns?
From reruns. It's coming back to me that I remember. Yeah, I think you'd also throw the word like maroon in there too.
Exactly. Yeah. So from that, it's now Elmer Fudd was not the smartest of people.
Yes. Yeah.
He was a hunter. Nimrod, not smart. Now you've got kind of
the evolution laid out right there.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right.
The other thing that caught my attention with that is because I had seen an article at some point about a Nimrod company in Libertyville. And I thought that was kind of a strange name for a company, but I never really looked at it closely to see what they made. So I went back and pulled the article that I was thinking of, and this is from 1929. Libertyville to be home of Nimrod Company. The product to be produced by the company will include hunting and camping clothing, gun cases, lawn hammocks, awnings, and kindred canvas and leather goods. And for those of our listeners, if you are familiar with the Frank G. Huff, or International Harvester Company, used to be at the end of Sunnyside Avenue, the Nimrod Company built the original building that company then inhabited later.
Yeah. So from Nimrods to
epidemic caused by pencils.
Pencils.
Okay.
An epidemic caused by not
pencils. Not of pencils. No. All right. So this actually took place in the state of New York. It says, because the children in the practice department of the State Normal School of Oswego, New York, had to use the same public pencils among themselves, diphtheria has spread among them to the extent of 16 cases. Later it says, after a class finished its drawing lessons, the pencils were placed in a desk, and the next class used the same sticks. It was impossible to restrain the children from putting the pencils in their mouths. I'm guessing that's still an issue today.
As a father of 5-year-olds, I can attest they put everything in their mouth no matter how many times you tell them to knock it off.
Exactly. I mean,
so
we're
diphtheria
lucky.
was a real risk then.
Yeah, we're lucky today. I mean, everyone gets a Tdap, one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And so that actually hasn't been the case since it started about in the 1940s when we started giving out that shot. And apparently up until then, diphtheria was actually a fairly, common, but it was not uncommon to have diphtheria.
If you had diphtheria, how serious was it?
And most people would recover from it, but there was a 5 to 10% rate of death from diphtheria if it was serious enough. So cases of diphtheria breaking out in a classroom would be a serious issue.
Yeah. So you said this was out of New York, though. Do you happen to remember what you were researching that made you stumble upon this?
Not necessarily. It could have been anything on the page. So generally what happens is, this is from 1903. I didn't give that. This is June 12th, 1903. Generally, I'm looking for a person, a business, an event, but I don't have a specific date. Or maybe I do, and I'm just within that paper. But generally what I'm doing is just reeling through the microfilm screen by screen or online, since we've digitized some of it, just going page by page to see if I can find the thing I'm looking for. So then I just happen to go past a page that says academic calls by pencils.
Right.
I'm like, what was that?
So to clarify, you were looking at a local paper.
Yes.
But the paper was covering this story that happened in New York.
Right.
Okay.
All right. So those are kind of the shorter blurb ones.
All right.
This one I also like a lot. It's a little longer. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I went to highlight just sections of it, and I just kept highlighting because it's just amusing.
Before you know it, the whole thing's yellow.
Exactly. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it will take a little longer. This is from the Lake County Independent, March 5th, 1915. Doctor takes a chicken for a ride.
So take us through this narrative ride.
So this happened in Waukegan. So the headline is, Doctor takes a chicken for a ride. Passerby sees it. Mrs. Hen sneaked her ride, remained perfectly quiet, cackled en route home. That's the whole headline. Okay. Dr. A.E. Brown of West Street took his chicken for a ride last evening in his auto, but he didn't know it. That is, he didn't know it during the first half of the journey downtown. He knew it later, for then the chicken occupied a seat in the auto, nestling and cackling on the seat alongside him, covered nicely with a robe and either enjoying the experience or being frightened. Just which feeling existed in the bird will have to be guessed at. Okay, and there's more. It seems that during the day Monday, 2 of the county doctors' Rhode Island red hens got out of their coop. They found a roost in the garage, and in the evening when Dr. Brown went to drive downtown, naturally he didn't look about to round up the chickens. He just got into the car, started it, backed out, and drove to his office. He was standing in front of the bank talking to a friend when he saw a man come along and, stopping in front of his auto, saw him gaze intently at the rear end of the machine. Dr. Brown wondered what was the matter. Flat tire? He said to himself as he watched the man. The latter then started to grin. Somebody did something to the car? Mused Dr. Brown. The man grinned all the more. By this time, Dr. Brown was getting rather interested himself, so going over to the car, he looked to see what had attracted the gaze of the other man. He soon found out. There, perched on the number rack, was one of his fine Rhode Island red hens, commonly called chickens. Squatting there in the bright moonlight, as unconcerned seemingly as any chicken could be on a moonlit night, sat Mrs. Hen, unconscious of the fact that their presence downtown was rather unusual, at that time of night especially, for chickens are supposed to be at home. It was then about 9 o'clock. So there's many things about this article I like.
Yeah, where do we start, right? There's the story itself.
The story of itself. I mean, it's, again, of another time. I just love the way it's written as well.
Well, that's what I was going to... Yes. 2 things that strike me about this is, first of all, this must have been maybe a slow news day. Or maybe not. Maybe you can speak to whether this is a more common type of story you would see in older newspapers. Or maybe it's in there even today and we just don't read it like that because it is the news of the day for us. And then later generations will read it and be like, wow, that must have been a slow news day. The other thing is, the way you just mentioned, the way it's written as like a story unfolding. Right. It doesn't have that sort of stock journalist language that's just this happened, then this happened, then this happened.
Right. It's just a really well-written piece.
Right.
I mean, I think of it as a human interest story. So we still have human interest stories today. They're usually, in Section 5, like the tempo section or something. So this isn't
front page news.
No. This is page 8.
Okay.
So this is into the paper somewhat. Yeah. But it is still, a local. Again, this is a Waukegan event, but it would have been, in the Libertyville paper. Yeah. What's interesting that's in the papers then that isn't in the papers today, and I don't have any examples of it because they're usually really short, is usually page 4 or 5 is the Libertyville happenings or heard and seen in Libertyville. Mm-hmm. And it's all about so-and-so is visiting town or so-and-so went on vacation to see their relatives in New York. But sometimes when you're talking about what am I looking for, a lot of times I'm going to the first page of the paper because that's where the main news stories are. And then I'm going to that Libertyville happenings section because I'm looking for what we today would think of like a big announcement of a company opening. might have just been in the Libertyville happenings. It may have not been a huge news story, but it's going to happen in these sort of hyper-local news.
Well, and it is a really well-written article. One editorial suggestion, though, would be they used the word auto, and they could have used flivver.
They could have. We don't know what type of car it was, so maybe he had a nice car.
That's true.
And then it
so
wouldn't
it
have
just
been a flivver.
didn't apply. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
All right. So what do we got next?
I got one more for you.
Okay.
This is one of my favorites, as well as several other librarians who have seen it. This is a Libertyville news item. It is from the November 9th, 1906 newspaper, and the headline is "One Man Riot in Libertyville."
Ooh, one man.
One man. Man runs amok among windows and mirrors, inflicting much damage to establishment. It's also, when you're talking about writing style, you'll see it's very descriptive. Cries of help emanating from the dram shop of George Beam in Libertyville Wednesday night roused the central portion of the town, and the crowd which quickly gathered witnessed George Keefe demonstrate his ability to personally conduct a first-class one-man riot. Because he was a little too much saturated with brew, he mixed with Park Bartlett, who presides, and in a moment things happened. When the clouds rolled away, the mirror back of the bar was broken, nearly all the glass about the place was shattered and gone. Keefe's gore was plenteously distributed upon the face of the landscape. Before he could subsidize his feelings, the place was a wreck. A glance bore out Bartlett's statement that something had been thrown. After a spell of activity, Keefe quelled himself as Officer Hentges could not be found. An inventory of the damage is still underway. Mayor McGuffin appeared and tried to hold the man until an officer arrived but was assaulted. Keefe then fled across river after threatening the lives of 2 young men who were ordered to watch him by Mr. McGuffin. He was traced several miles by a trail of blood which came from his wounds from glass cuts.
Wow. But you're right, though. I mean, it's written almost like reading like a nonfiction book, like a piece out of a nonfiction book. It's using phrases like "as the clouds parted" or "a trail of blood."
Exactly. It's very narrative.
Yeah, there's touches to the language that are very different than what we're used to with journalism.
Yeah, which actually makes it really fun to read. I mean, what caught my attention in this was the headline: "One Man Riot." How can you have a one-man riot? What is that, an oxymoron?
Yeah, right.
How can that be? And then again, just some of the language like dram shop, which is it's a bar that sold things often by the dram, which is about 1/8 flowing out. And then also just George Beam. I had done some research on that bar before and that family before. We talked about Hattie Beam in one of our earlier podcasts. Yeah. This is actually her father.
Okay.
This was his shop too. This Beam's shop was actually on East Cook Avenue at 116, 118 East Cook, and that building's still standing today. So next time you walk by there, you can think of the one-man riot.
All right. Well, Jenny, this is a lot of fun. Thank you so much for sharing your local history expertise and showing us some of the highlights of your research.
You're welcome.
So if someone wanted to dig through these archives themselves, try to dig up their own funny and unusual stories or funny words, where can they do that?
So for local papers, we have 1894 to 1923 are available online through our local history page. You can browse them. You can search them. They are full-text searchable. You can also come into the library and use the microfilm for any other year. So, again, starting in 1894, we have that paper up through the Independent Register ending in 87, 88, somewhere in there.
Okay.
The New Sun after that. Previous to 1894, we do have some of the Waukegan papers back to 1847. They're not complete, but there's some there. So if you need to go back further, you want to see the newspapers during the Civil War, you can look at the microfilm here as well.
That's very cool.
And not to forget, we also have the Chicago Tribune is online through our research page.
Yeah.
That goes back, I think, into the maybe around 1850. That's where I would go.
Okay, yeah, and I think what we'll do is in our show notes, we'll leave a link to the local history page on our website, which also kind of explains what you just said and offers the direct links to a lot of that stuff.
That'd be great.
So while you're on that local history page, don't forget to also check out the library's blog, Shelf Life. That's where library staffers post book reviews, genealogy tips, local history stories written by Jenny, along with a few other librarians, and so much more. That blog can be found at shelflife.cooklib.org. If you ever want to get in touch with us about the podcast, leave us some feedback. Send those messages to webmaster@cooklib.org. And if you enjoy this podcast, share it with those you love. And one of the best things you can do to support us is take a moment to leave a rating on Apple Podcasts. We'll be back soon, but until then, keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.